Ladies and gentlemen, if you could be drawing yourselves together. Welcome to the second half of our long meeting, which started last Thursday. Now, it's raining so heavily that it probably doesn't matter if the fire alarm goes off, because it'll probably put a fire out. But if it does go off, as we haven't got a scheduled fire alarm test, we'll assume it's genuine. The Democratic Services officers will find a safe way out of the building and come back and tell us what it is, and we will all exit. Now, can I ask if anyone is going to be recording the second half of this meeting? It's not to stop you, that's just so that we know. No, okay, thank you very much. Without further ado, we move to the agenda for this evening. Apologies for absence. I've had one from Councillor Harwood, who is working on the flood issues. Councillor Lottie Parfitt-Reid, and unfortunately her substitute has got sort of reined in, so Wendy won't be able to substitute for her. Are there any other apologies?
Councillor Paul will be, and I will be substituting for him.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Well anticipated. Councillor Perry.
Just to say, I think Councillor Eves is coming, but he may be a bit late.
Understandable in the circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Right, thank you. Any other substitute members? No. Notification of visiting members. I see Councillor Richard Webb. If you could tell us the item.
Councillor Webb for agenda item 26.
Thank you, Councillor. Items withdrawn from this evening's agenda. Are there any? No? Good. Item 5, items the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report, which we have here this evening, as it relates to matters to be considered this evening. Is it agreed that we take the urgent update report, members? Thank you very much. Item 6, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? No. Thank you very much. Item 7, disclosures of lobbying. We'll take that at the relevant item. Thank you very much. Yes, I suppose we could declare that, well, no, not quite everything, actually. Item 8, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. It is unlikely that we will need to go into part 2. However, it is possible, if we get into technical discussions on Monks Lake, that we will do so, but hopefully we can manage without doing so. Otherwise, I intend to take all the items in public. And now we turn to the planning agenda for this evening. And having mentioned it, we start with the appropriate for this evening, so, lakes, Monks Lake application, and ask the officer to update us as to where we are at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. And this is part retrospective application, retention of recreational fishing lakes and works to create additional lakes and the erection of a clubhouse building. I'll just very briefly just go through the site. Appreciate some members are fully aware, some weren't at the previous meeting. The site here, you can see it in red. It's north of the A229. It's got a lawful access of the A229. And a road that runs down to a parking area which also has permission. There's existing raised fishing lakes to the southeast. They all benefit from planning permission, and there's further raised lakes which are not part of the application site, part of Riverfield Fish Farm. River Belt, SSI, immediately to the north of the site. Part of the site, roughly about a third from the river, is within flood zone 2 and 3. There's a number of properties, houses to the west, including 2 listed buildings and the closest listed building, Hertzfield Barn, and a number of residential properties to the south as well. And in terms of the proposals, as members are aware, within this area there's 2 large ground level lakes, Bridges and Puma called, and in this area 3 raised lakes are proposed, numbered 1, 2 and 3. 2 and 3 are finished, as you see on site, largely finished, and the first lake requires further works to complete. Also proposed is a clubhouse and upgrading of the car park. So the application was heard at Planning Committee on the 23rd of January. It was recommended for approval. Contrary to this recommendation, committee voted to refuse the application for 3 reasons, and they're set out in the minutes and your report. Officers gave a warning that there was likely to be a risk of significant costs for unreasonable behaviour at appeal, so the decision's been deferred till this meeting, with the grounds further considered by officers and with Council's advice also taken. The cost warning we gave was on the basis that the grounds for refusal themselves were not clear or precise enough and did not make reference to appropriate policies, but also because, in officers' opinion, the proposals are not significantly different from those considered to be acceptable in 2012, so it could be regarded as inconsistent decision-making. And basically, costs at appeal can be awarded for unreasonable behaviour, including not determining similar developments in a consistent manner, which we feel is relevant to this case. But I'll now run through the grounds that were put forward. In terms of landscaping, as we say in the report, we don't consider there to be a sound reason for reaching a different conclusion from 2012, and so it's advised that that ground should not be pursued. In terms of heritage, if members considered that the open and level nature of the application site, as it was in 2003, they consider that's important to the adjacent Grade 2 listed Hertzfield Barns history and its historical setting, and therefore its significance, it would be reasonable to consider that the development would cause less than substantial harm to the significance of that barn, contrary to the local plan, policies and the NPPF. There would also be a sound arguable case for taking the view that this less than substantial harm is not outweighed by any public benefits from the development, because they're not considered to be significant. So on this basis, it's advised that such a ground for refusal, subject to it being refined, as outlined at paragraph 2.7 of the report, could be sustained at appeal. Now, the risk of costs being awarded comes about because the council found that the impact on that building, on a listed building, was acceptable in 2012, and officers consider the development before members is not significantly different. Therefore, the decision could be viewed as being inconsistent and therefore unreasonable. However, if members cited the following reasons for reaching a different decision, the risk of costs award is considered to be low. As we've said in the report, members could refer to the enhanced attention to the Section 66 that basically came through a case law, Court of Appeal case in 2014. And I'd also say that in the 2012 committee report, it's not a criticism, but there was not reference to Section 66. So members could rely on that. Also, the committee report in 2012 referred to the heights of the lakes as 4 and 5 metres. Again, that's not a criticism, but now proposed the lakes are up to 6.2 metres in places, and notably that is near to the listed building, so that could be another change in circumstances. The banks would also rise closer to the western boundary near the listed building, so again, that's a difference from the previous scheme. In terms of amenity, it's advised that the ground relating to outlook could not be sustained at appeal and would be unreasonable. In terms of privacy, there may be a reasonable argument, but members would need to be more precise about what properties they consider would be affected and why, and that as is outlined at paragraph 2.12. This reason is considered to be tenuous, and again, it's difficult to justify why a different reason is being reached, but again, members could refer to the differences from the previous committee report and the previous scheme. So in conclusion, whilst officers maintain the application should be approved, our advice is that should members wish to refuse the application, they should refine the 2 reasons of refusal relating to heritage and overlooking only, and make clear the reasons why a different decision is being made. These reasons can potentially be sustained at appeal. A risk of cost relating to consistency of decisions would remain, but it's considered to be a low risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. That's admirably concise and lucid. I'm going to ask the legal officer to just explain how public speaking works this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the chairman and then the planning officer introduces the item and the chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, if you press the middle button on the microphone unit, you don't need to hold it down. The button itself will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak and you'll see your time counting down on the screen in the corner. At the end of the 3 minutes, the chairman will tell you when your time is up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button on the microphone unit again and it will turn white and return to your seat. You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the council, but they don't sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on the applications. Starred items are those items that members have indicated their agreement to or no one is against. You will have the option to maintain your right to speak or you can retract that right and the application will go to the vote. And we do have a starred item on the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I draw members' attention to the fact there is an urgent update on Monks Lakes, and I call our sole speaker this evening, Ms Lord, for the objectors, please.
Thank you. A note containing comments on the latest officer report, including an assessment of the legal issues, was circulated to members of the committee on Tuesday. A set of planning reasons for refusal and an extract of the 2012 officer report and presentation transcript were also appended. You've been provided with a further note today in order to clarify issues raised by Tay-Time Limited on behalf of the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, including the facts regarding the expired 2003 permission and Mr. Harrison's stated business as a land tipping site. The law requires that permission is only given in exceptional circumstances and that the applicant derives no benefit from the fact this application is largely retrospective. The presence of the imported waste on site cannot in itself be an exceptional circumstance. All assessments of impact must be made against the pre-development position, i.e. a low-lying field with no waste material on site as in 2003. So members must ask themselves, if this application was before you with no imported material on site, would you grant permission? When it comes to matters like landscape character, residential amenity and listed building assessments, you must reach your own judgment, even if that differs from the opinion of officers. The 2008 enforcement notice, upheld at appeal in 2015, states this was a waste disposal operation, and yet there appears to be no information before you on this aspect of the development and no attempt to secure permission for it. The officer report again gives significant weight to the flawed 2012 decision. Whilst this may be a matter for members to consider, this does not mean that you have to give any weight to that decision, particularly in circumstances where, as can be seen from the 2012 report and transcript extracts, as a matter of fact, members were told by officers the finished banks would be 4 metres high and start to rise 15 metres from the site boundary. This may not be consistent with officers' assessment of those superseded plans now, but this is what members were told and what the decision was based on. This is materially different from the scheme before you today, with banks in excess of 6 metres high, starting at the boundary of the site. The development has harmful impacts, which some members have seen for themselves. There are also unresolved technical issues due to a lack of information on behalf of the applicants. Some members have seen the harm to the fabric of the neighbouring listed building, and it's not safe to assume that the scheme will alleviate the groundwater or surface water flooding. In view of the legal and planning requirements, in accordance with the indicative vote in January, members are invited to refuse this application for the set of reasons provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, members, first of all, direct your attention in the new report to pages 40 and 41, paragraphs 207 and 212, which attempt quite well, I think, to expand on the two possible arguments for refusal. Members need to consider these carefully. Now, whilst I hear what the objector says, we did make, in fact, we made a decision, and it wasn't an indicative vote, and it was because there was a risk, or perceived risk at that time, that the deferral procedure was activated. We have had advice on all of those potential grounds of refusal, and two of the three are defensible. Now, I'm minded personally, despite my slight scepticism at the last meeting, to move that we do continue to maintain those grounds, in particular in relation to the heritage, because quite clearly the Barnwell Court decision in the High Court and the Court of Appeal is a major change. It's a very major change in case law. And secondly, there have been sufficient changes in relation to the plan overall to be able to maintain a privacy objection, provided the properties that are affected are clearly indicated as set out in paragraph 212. Now, I'm just going to ask Mr. Timms if I need to add anything to that to make it clearer, or whether that's clear enough.
Yeah, no, I'd just add on the setting of the listed building, I think members need to make clear that they consider how the site was before the development was there, where it was flat, that they consider that as an important part of that barn's setting and its history, the fact that it was level and it was open.
Absolutely, that is a very clear and important consideration. But before I move on, I need to know whether what I'm saying is seconded. Councillor Perry, do you wish to?
Yes, I support entirely what you just said, actually. And the Barnwell Manor case is very important. Lord Justice Sullivan, I've got to say I'm throwing away this line, but I do know. I worked with him when he was a Queen's Counsel, and I trust his views on this. So I don't want to repeat what was said last time. There's a danger we do that. And I refer to, I'm very happy to second. If you're moving, Chairman, then I'm very happy. If you're moving, then yes, I'm very happy to support you.
Right, I think I've said enough to allow Mr. Timms to elaborate.
Yeah, so I think, obviously, previous committee, we had to let you, decide what your grounds for refusal are. I think what you're saying in terms of the listed building, and this is taken partly from your first ground, is the size, height, and proximity of the raised lakes. Particularly the western bunding, would cause less than substantial harm to the setting and the significance of the Grade 2 listed Hertzfield barn. And that's through the loss of the open and level historic setting of the barn, which forms an important part of its significance and its setting. And then in terms of getting the policies correct, this would be contrary to policies SP18 and DM4 of the Maidstone local plan and the MPPF. And also that the less than substantial harm would not be outweighed by any public benefits. Is that the case as well? Yeah. In terms of the overlooking, again, due to the height and the proximity of the lakes along the western boundary, their use for fishing would result in an unacceptable loss of privacy and a perceived overlooking from anglers at an elevated position. And that's to the houses and gardens of Hertzfield Barn, and numbers 3, 4, 5 and 6 Hertzfield Farm cottages. So basically the properties along that western boundary, and that would result in harm to their amenity contrary to policy DM1 of the local plan.
Thank you very much. Before I move to the vote, I should have taken declarations of lobbying, but I think we've all been lobbied on this one. But, yeah, that's everyone. Thank you. Right, anyone else? Because I think the position is clear. I'm going to the vote unless there are any questions or additions or subtractions. No? In that case, it's been proposed and seconded. Recommendation to refuse on the 2 grounds as elaborated. Sorry, hang on.
No, that's fine. And just to be clear on the differences from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll do that first.
Yeah, we've gone. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was unanimous, I believe.
And then I think, mate, this is just why you're reaching a different decision.
Yes.
I can read something.
Yeah. And just to, do you want to add
Yeah,
that?
and I think members need to be clear why they're reaching a different decision, and from what Councillor Perry said, they're giving enhanced attention to duty under Section 66 of the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act 1990. The previous committee report to members referred to the height of the lakes as 4 and 5 metres, and they are now shown as 6.2, and that's near the listed barn. The banks would also rise closer to the western boundary, and sort of general changes from the previous scheme. And in terms of the privacy, again, members consider the changes from the 2012 proposals as sufficient to reach an alternative conclusion, and again, the reference to the difference in heights, and again, it's along that western boundary where the heights are slightly different. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Right. We now move on to something rather less contentious. Second item this evening. This is a starred item, so does any member wish to speak on this application? I don't think any of us are against this application, or wanted to speak on it. Mr. Bell, for the applicant, are you here? Members are minded not to speak on this application and move straight to the vote on the recommendation for refusal. Do you waive your right to speak? Thank you very much. Thank you. That always helps. Right, as this is my ward, I will propose the recommendation for approval. There's no urgent update, I checked. Can I have a second? Yeah, thank you. Any lobbying on this application other than me as the ward member? Right. Please indicate.
Everyone.
That's everyone apart from Councillor Atkinson, I think. Check your emails working, Keith. Right. Right, all those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. The best of luck with the project, mate. Have a nice evening. Right. Move on to item 3, page 27. Or 313 if you've got the original agenda, which is Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust Hermitage Lane. Urgent update, because there's a very long
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is a detailed urgent update with this item that I will take you through during the presentation. The urgent update focuses on the comments made by KCC Highways, the environmental health officers, and a number of additional comments from neighbours, but the same neighbours who commented before the printed report was issued to you. It is a planning application for the erection of a deck over the existing surface car park to provide in excess of 200 net additional parking spaces. Let me just enlarge this for you. Bear with me. Right, there we go. So this drawing shows the overall hospital estate with the existing areas of car parking in various colours. The green areas are those predominantly used by staff, and the amber, those predominantly used by visitors. You can see the main complex of buildings in the central part, with the car parking. This drawing is tilted 90 degrees, so the top of the drawing is east. So when I refer to the eastern boundary, I'll be describing the boundary at the top, and the cursor has disappeared again. Key points to note are at the top of the drawing, adjacent to the green car parking area, the residential estate that is situated very close to the site's eastern boundary. Zooming in slightly, you can see that residential estate above the blue line. The application site area involves the area shaded red and the area shaded blue, but the important point to note is that the additional deck will only sit over the area shaded red. The area shaded blue is an existing surface car park that will remain an existing surface car park. They are shuffling the bays and the planting beds to improve the circulation route. I've also highlighted on this drawing the green dotted line that marks the existing landscaped boundary, and I'll come back onto that. It's not much to look at as a proposal. It's a steel frame structure with a series of concrete decked pads. It's a permanent structure, but it could in theory be taken away because it sits on relatively shallow foundations. This drawing here, you can see the basic framework of the structure. There's a ramp up one side and a ramp down the other. The direction of travel and circulation has been amended since the application was first submitted, following liaison between the two ward councillors and the hospital to alleviate some concerns about noise and direction of headlamps. Importantly, if you look at this next drawing, you can see here the lower deck. So this is the existing surface car park that is being built over with the deck above. There will be a screen around the whole of the upper deck, and in the direction facing the neighbouring residential estate, that screen will be solid so as not to allow the transmission of headlights towards residential properties. The deck will be accessed from the existing circulation route, which you can see on this drawing. The boundary with the residential properties is marked by a green buffer, but that green buffer does narrow considerably at the northern end, which is sort of, you're looking northwards on this drawing. So it is quite narrow between the houses to the right and the main car parking area. This is a view from the front door of one of the neighbours. You can see a picket fence in the centre ground. That's the boundary of the existing surface car park. That area, the character of that area won't fundamentally change. It will still be car parking, but as I'll come on to, the hospital have agreed that the width of that buffer will be widened to allow mounding to block existing headlamps, so there'll be a net gain there, and to improve the quality of the screening and buffer between the two different land uses. This is looking from the car park back to the neighbours. The deck will be at its closest point to the nearest neighbour, circa 60 metres away. We feel that that is adequate in terms of issues of overlooking, but as I mentioned, there are some narrow pinch points in the existing buffer. So I attended the site on Monday with the hospital, and we've agreed, for example, that the areas closest, so effectively the equivalent of a parking bay along that boundary, will be widened. So the parking will be removed and the landscaping widened as part of a scheme to be submitted pursuant to a condition. So in effect, there will be a net benefit in that there'll be a greater separation between the existing parking and the residents. And that will serve both biodiversity and landscape benefits. This shows a rough draft of a bund that the hospital are considering. It won't ultimately be that high, but as part of the landscaping scheme, there'll be a raised element and there'll be shrubs. The residents don't want tall planting or too much tall planting in this area because it's where the sun goes down. So the important thing is the scheme will reinforce the low to mid-height screening. The hospital have started work, and that work is entirely at their risk. You should not afford any weight to the fact that they have started. You are considering this application against the benchmark of the existing surface car park. The fact that they started work early did cause considerable concern to a number of residents. I've met with one of the residents, we've engaged with other residents, the ward councillors and the hospital have met, and the hospital have agreed to engage with residents more openly in terms of the programme of works. They have submitted a construction and environmental management plan that sets out the hours of work, the nature of the operation, so that residents have an understanding of the likely noisy events when they are, the methods for suppression of noise, dust, and reducing impact on air quality. Importantly, the site is hard surfaced, so lorries aren't driving as they might on a greenfield site through muddy fields. They're principally just taking excavated waste away from the site where necessary. So the environmental conditions off-site aren't that significantly affected. But the CEMP will give residents clarity on the works that the hospital are carrying out. So in terms of the assessment, we consider that whilst the structure is utilitarian in its nature, it's broadly in keeping with the character of the existing car park. The hospital itself isn't a particularly architecturally sensitive location. In terms of traffic impact, the principle of providing additional car parking is accepted by both ourselves and KCC. It's important that members understand that this isn't a solution to the whole problem. This is really the hospital's sort of first stage of works to improve issues regarding the inadequacy of car parking on the site, which has led to unlawful parking within the site, or say like enabling parking off the site, and the intention is that this will reduce that. In parallel with the application, the hospital are working with both ourselves and Kent County Council on a travel plan, and for example they've implemented a park and ride scheme with Arriva, and we are working with them to ensure that that is developed properly as time moves on. The travel plan isn't conditioned as part of the application because this is an application for car parking, not a land use. But both ourselves and KCC are confident that the travel plan can progress in a positive manner, and the hospital's commitment appears to confirm that. We're comfortable that there will be no adverse impacts on amenity by way of loss of light, outlook, impact of artificial lighting or noise. So on that basis, we conclude that there are no planning grounds for refusal. You will see, however, in your late papers that the County Council Highways Officer has raised a holding objection. The holding objection is on the basis that the submitted transport assessment hasn't satisfactorily demonstrated that there won't be an adverse impact on the access and egress to Hermitage Lane. It's not anticipated that there will be an adverse impact because this is an application for 200 spaces. The hospital already has a permission for 150, which this replaces. So you have to consider that this is a net gain of 50 compared to the fallback position. So we are recommending that if you feel that the Highway Authority's grounds are sufficient to continue to investigate, that you delegate permission to the officers subject to the applicant providing the final information necessary for Kent County Council to confirm that there is no adverse impact on the junction. You could conclude that the material considerations outweigh that harm. The difficulty is neither myself nor the highway officer can tell you what the harm is, so you couldn't do the balancing exercise. So on balance, our request is that if you are happy with the principle of the scheme, that you delegate approval to ourselves and Kent County Council to secure the final information. If the information comes back and there is harm that cannot be mitigated, then we would bring the application back to you. If we're satisfied that there is either no unacceptable harm or there is a scheme of mitigation, then we were asking for delegated approval to sign that off. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. As I said, there is an urgent update, so do please make sure you read that because it is a very long yes, I know, and I will be calling them in due course, but I thought I'd better call the objector first. So, Ms. Berman.
Whilst the construction of the deck is not ideal for local residents, it would appear that the council are of mind to agree to the proposal. I understand the need for additional parking at the hospital, but there does need to be more a neighbourly approach with due regard for the natural environment. Work started on the site within the first week of February 2020. Existing curbs have been removed and foundations dug. We now have cement being delivered and construction of the columns to support the deck appear to have commenced. The constructors are on site 6 days a week and can be usually heard around 7:40 a.m. They finish around 5:30 to 6 o'clock weekdays and by 1 p.m. on Saturday. On Friday the 21st and Saturday the 22nd of February, a considerable amount of soil was placed along the eastern boundary in 2 separate areas over existing shrubs and trees which do not form part of the existing plan for development of the car park. This further negates any natural environmental screening that we currently have. Whilst this was happening, there was no banksman ensuring the safety of the public whilst the soil was dumped by a solitary driver, as this was occurring outside the fenced construction zone next to the public footpath on the eastern boundary. As it was a windy weekend, our cars were filthy along with our windows, and the mounds are in close proximity to our residents. We are experiencing a significant amount of dust and therefore would employ that dust here is managed. In addition to the mounds of soil are attracting children who naturally want to climb. There is nothing to stop them doing so, and also at the weekend children are being attracted to the skip and piles of wood which are located outside the construction fenced area. In the circumstances, the committee may wish to ensure that stringent measures are put in place to ensure minimal disruption to residents and the safety of the general public. I would suggest that the site requires some security, especially at weekends. In 2003, there was not a car park in this location, just an empty field. When planning permission at time was given, the planting took a little time to establish, but by 10 years, the car park and hospital were barely visible. This is testament to the planning at that time. Residents are now faced with going back to square one in regards to planting. The trees and embankment along the north side and in the car park have been dug out and wood shredded. This is in close proximity to the trees that have been felled for the road along through Bluebell Woods. This is a significant number of trees that have been felled over the 2 areas in a short period of time. The application proposed by the hospital does little to mitigate the loss of trees and shrubs in the area. In the circumstances, I would strongly urge the committee to adopt the recommendations cited in Mr Mackay's planning report in regards to dense mitigating planting along the eastern boundary, and would implore the committee that this is prioritised. The committee may also wish to consider other measures to enhance and develop the natural landscape in this area to compensate for the substantial loss.
Thank you, just in time. Well done. Can be a bit of a dash sometimes. Mr Lahane, did you wish to add anything on the highway issues?
Thank you. KCC Highways recognises the need to ensure that sustainable parking provision and access to the hospital is available and provided in such a way as to meet the needs of the present, the hospital's future needs, and to do so without causing an unsustainable impact on the local highway network. While it's not anticipated that the effect of these proposals will constitute a significant impact on the local highway network, a recommendation from KCC Highways can only be made on the basis of the evidence that's presented. The applicant has been unable to conclusively evidence a robust forecast of the impact this proposal is likely to have on the local highway network. The applicant has also been unable to provide a robust forecast for the effect these proposals will have on capacity at the junctions connecting the site to Hermitage Lane. This is because the transport modelling that was carried out by the applicant did not include the entirety of the Hermitage Lane, Tarragon Road, Philpitts Avenue signalised junction, which therefore makes the results of the modelling unreliable. Due to having insufficient evidence to ascertain a robust forecast of the trip generation and future highways capacity impact resulting from the proposal, KCC Highways have raised a holding objection to this application. KCC recommends the applicant should be required to provide evidence of a robust methodology used to determine a forecasted trip generation of the proposal, and provide junction capacity assessments to assess the impact of the proposal on both access junctions with the hospital site, including all elements of both junctions. On receipt of this information, KCC Highways will be able to confirm its formal recommendation on the planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That would suggest that, as Mr Mackey said in the introduction, we will need to amend the recommendation if it's approved to have a delegation so that those points can be picked up. Just for people's information, the objector referred in effect to a number of issues that are picked up on page 148 in relation to condition 3, which is now updated because those details have now been submitted. If you'd like to just...
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I mentioned in the presentation, because of the acuteness of the construction impacts, because they have already commenced works, rather than relying on a pre-commencement condition, we've asked for the construction management plan to be submitted ahead. So condition 3 will be amended not to require a construction management plan, but to require the scheme to be carried out in accordance with. Thank you.
Thank you. That is two important changes. Well, I've got something I want to add to the recommendation later, but before that, I will ask which of the two ward members here would like to speak to this.
I've got first option, obviously. We've had a concern with the workers at the hospital been parking, street parking for years, and we've been pushing the hospital to come up with some solution for additional car parking space. Well, they've come up with this car parking space, and it actually came to both Ashley's and my notice a few weeks ago when we were told about work had already started, which came as a little bit of a surprise. But to all events, we went round and saw the hospital staff or the managers around there, and a lot of the concerns that the neighbours had, we actually raised them with the constructions, the progress with the constructions that was going on, and there are a number of improvements that we've arranged with the hospital that they would provide for us, and that mainly it is the improved planting which the residents are after, the second deck screening so that there's no light pollution gets into any of the neighbouring houses, and also the street lighting is not going to be any higher than what's existing, so there will be no bleeding of street lighting across there either. We've also negotiated at some stage which will obviously come to the delegated officers' powers about the landscaping, and we've managed, hopefully we are going to have a green wall provided on the side that's facing the housing, so it'll be screened again. And the other concern that was obviously about the vehicles' access onto an egress off of the car park. We've negotiated them to change direction of the flow of traffic, so again the lights do not impede the local neighbours. And I don't think I've got any more to add other than that. I don't know if you've got any more to add, Ashley.
Yeah, the main idea with changing the up and down was obviously noise, because when you go up a ramp, you're accelerating. So to deaden the noise, we changed it to the end where the woods are, and asked, obviously asked if they could change it around, which they have done. I'm in agreement with Brian that the hospital have been really good in listening to what we've got to say, the concerns. They gave us maps to give out to any of the residents that wanted to see what they were going to be doing, and obviously Austin has told you about the bund. which is an improvement because it's going to stop the bleeding of light from the existing car park. There was also a concern about the trees that they'd taken out. Now, I've got to use my memory now. They're not native trees that they took out, but the ones that they're going to replant are going to be native trees. So, all in all, they have been listening, and I would, at this early stage, I would like to move that we delegate the approval to the officers and to KCC, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would like to also suggest that this is an important application and I do support it, and as you may know, Councillor Harwood and I have had discussions about this years ago, and unfortunately they never quite got their ducks in a row, but their ducks are now more or less in a row. But it's an important application, and both the landscaping details and the travel plan, which potentially is it started off very weak, but it is improving, but it's a work in progress. So I think what I would like to see happen, and the officer says we can do this, is to have a small group of members to work with the trust to ensure the delivery of the landscaping scheme and the travel plan. I would propose that would be the 2 ward members, chairman, vice chairman, and Councillor Harwood if he's interested. And if you wish to be Councillor Mumford, but I think keeping it small would be fine, would be better. But if you and Mr. Atkinson wish to, yeah. Okay, right. So that will have you got the. So that would be 2 ward members, chairman, vice chairman, Councillor Harwood, to work with the trust on the landscaping and travel plan development. Let's see if we could add that to the recommendation, Mr. Mackey.
Yes, those aren't part of the conditions of the application. Well, the landscaping is, but as the ward councillors will be aware, the hospital is doing a site-wide enhancement strategy focusing on biodiversity. So whilst that is beyond the current application, it is something that this group can discuss without delaying the implementation of the scheme.
I mean, if we need to make that a separate resolution, that's not a problem, but I think we do need to have a formal vote on that. Do you need to be that second resolution, or can you incorporate that?
The resolution will be to delegate authority subject to Kent County Council being satisfied on the highways evidence. Condition 3 on the recommendation is amended from requiring a construction management plan to requiring adherence to the construction management plan. There's a minor tweak to condition 9, drawing numbers, but that's simply to reflect the amendments that the ward council has secured, and we will effectively, you are suggesting that there will be a working group that will review with the ward councillors, the other representatives, who will communicate with the residents as they are already, the evolution of the landscaping scheme. And just to give members some comfort on that, the Trust have appointed the Kent Wildlife Trust to prepare a landscape and biodiversity plan, and they are very keen on engaging with the community on that anyway. And the second part is that the travel plan and the travel plan monitoring and the teeth in that are part of that monitoring group.
Okay, that's fine, that covers it. By the way, can we take declarations of lobbying at this point, which I keep forgetting? Right, I have to have words with my colleagues about lobbying all of them, can we see? All right, now, Councillor Perry.
No, I will be very quick. I'd like to thank the 2 ward members for the work you've done on this, because I think it's excellent, and I totally support the proposal that's been put forward. I think it's very good. I think the car park is terribly important, actually. I mean, I'm a frequent user of Maidstone Hospital, so I attend the diabetic clinic, and I have struggled a few times to park my car. And though I take the point that we need to encourage public transport, if you're going for an appointment on a bus particularly the infamous number 5 from Staplehurst, your chances of making it on time are not terribly good sometimes. So I do, the car park's important. The other thing, I'm sorry, Ken Highways, I've got to have a slight dig at you, and this is not you personally. I sat around this committee for a number of years, as a few of us have, and we've built, big estates, we built all these houses, and Ken Highways, have we asked for their opinion, and they very rarely have given it. And yet, for a car park in the hospital, we have a 7-page little report. Very good, it's very detailed, but it does have to say, slightly surprised me, if I may put it that way. But I do support the work that, the proposal put forward by the ward members is an excellent one, and the work by Mr. Mackey as well. Thank you.
I would only say on that it shows the value that the increased quality and quantity of reports we're getting on some issues does reflect the importance of having a KCC officer effectively seconded to Maidstone Borough Council, and that is an innovation that in many areas is working very well. So that might explain the difference. Councillor Brindle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 points. Whilst I support fully this application, and I note that the extra parking is for staff car park, someone who has spent a great deal of time in the last 3 weeks or so trying to find a car park space there, it's very, very hard, and I'm just wondering what provision there may well be made for patients and visitors, because at the moment that seems to be a major problem. The second point, I fully support the park and ride. I've used it myself, even though on occasions I've been the only person on the bus. Can I ask that the committee looking at the planting and the greenery look at providing the green walls for the walls that face the housing, and that be included in their submissions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We take note of that. Right. Look, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's pretty much been said, but the roads around there are already suffering from these cars that don't have car parking spaces currently. So I know that we've got to do due diligence, but we are, in effect, we're already dealing with the problem, and this is moving in the right direction, especially with the safeguards. So if it hasn't been seconded, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, Councillor Kimment, I'll let you come back brief.
Yeah, 2 things. The green, yeah, that's all been discussed. Brian and myself have discussed that, and also about what my colleague Brian said about the estate parking. What a lot of people don't realise is the staff, if they start at a different time, which is say 9 o'clock rather than 8 o'clock, then they know the car park's going to be full. So what they do is they dive for the streets nearest and walk in. So that's why a lot of the residents that are, I live next to the hospital, so I suffer it all the time. And there must be about 15 or 20 roads that are the worst roads for it, and they're not even getting their bin collections on the right days because of the cars parked there, and the bin lorry just can't make it through. So I just wanted to let Brian know why the reason was.
Thank you very much. I think that's everyone. Right, is everyone clear on the amended recommendation? In that case, it's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? That's unanimous. No further votes required. We move on to item 4, Weirton Hall Farm, East Hall Hill, Bolton, Monchelsea. This so far has no one wishing to speak to it. Are you going to want to speak to it, Councillor? You are. In that case, we'll have it introduced.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to stall on this item until Mr Bailey arrived, but right on cue, he's here. In 2019, the Council granted planning permission for a small building on part of an existing plot used by a but a tree consultant and operator. The words have lost me for a moment, but you know what I mean. Tree surgeon. Thank you. The building is a small single-storey building, approximately in the position of where that caravan is now. The approved use of the building is for a training workshop for the tree surgeons, with accommodation that could be used either as a holiday let or as accommodation for the company themselves. They have experienced particular difficulties in recruiting staff, and one of the difficulties has been the availability of accommodation that would fit the contract period of their staff. The planning permission prevents any occupation, be it by staff or as a holiday let, for a period of more than 28 days. They have therefore requested that we agree to an amendment of the condition, not in relation to the holiday accommodation, but in relation to the staff length of occupation. At the moment, if they hired a member of staff, they could only stay for a month in effect, whereas they may appoint a member of staff for, say, 3 or 6 months. So therefore, the accommodation for staff wasn't providing the necessary incentive for recruitment. As officers, we are satisfied that so long as the use by staff is tied solely to the existing company, then there would be no harm arising from the relaxation of the condition. The building is exactly as approved. The building could be occupied 12 months of the year, albeit in 28-day slots. So the character of the building won't change as long as it remains entirely ancillary to the operation. So on that basis, with no change in the character or appearance of the area, and the fact that this supports the objectives of a local rural business, we recommend that one relaxation of the condition, but with the added clause that it is linked only to their operation. So it's linked to the planning unit and to them, so that gives us comfort that it's enforceable should there be any attempt to let it separately. So we recommend that the relevant condition is amended to afford that flexibility.
That seems very sensible. There is an urgent update, members. Can I take any declarations of lobbying? That shot up, Councillor Mumford. Yeah, it came out quite late, so it's probably, you'll find it when you get home. Right, can we take that again? Lobbying. Thank you. Right. Councillor Mumford, as you're the ward member, and you said you'd point on it.
Yeah, I'm sure the officers have coffee break and say, how can we challenge Mumford this week? Right, my parish council apologises profoundly that they got confused about the adjourned meeting and the rules for speakers on adjourned meeting. Otherwise, it was them that called it forward and they would be here, but they got confused over that. So, well, last year, the officers put in a condition here, and that was to prevent the development becoming a permanent residence in a place that would not normally be permitted. And we're told about conditions so often. They're there to make unacceptable applications acceptable. They've got to be enforceable, related to the development and all of those things. And last year, an officer felt to prevent a permanent residence in a place that wouldn't normally be accepted, he needed to put that condition in. And now we're being asked to take it out within 5 months. The reason why I'm a bit confused is if you look at SP12, Bournemouth and Chelsea has got a tremendous problem with supplying employment, and it actually says that there is limited employment opportunities within the village, even though we're a large village. Thought I'd get that one in. the point being, if you've got somewhere there that is going to be rented, where are you and you've got someone local who is not going to go in there, who are you going to choose? Well, obviously the person outside of Bolton-on-Chelsea that's going to both work for you and pay rent, not the person in Bolton-on-Chelsea that's just going to work for you. So I say that the temptation to deny another employment slot within Bolton-on-Chelsea is there in financial ways for that business. So I would like to see a condition on that use, and I'd like that to be relative to the employment, as the officers have said, but for 6 months only. And that's what I'm proposing, that we put in another condition for 6 months only. Otherwise, what you're doing, you're denying another opportunity for local people to get a job. Because if I was that business, I would want to both rent that and have someone work for me. And that would be someone outside of Bolton-on-Chelsea if they had to rent it. So that's what I'm proposing.
Yeah, I can see that there might be some concerns. I'm not quite sure whether planning law is actually quite capable of dealing with that. It's going to be an interesting one. I'll turn to the officers in a minute. Unfortunately, most of the actual submission that the parish council has made is about what might happen in terms of future growth, and so I take it you're not necessarily. We need as a committee to look at the application that has been made. The question.
Yeah, I think I need to answer that.
I will.
I have
no
involvement in what the parish council do.
No,
they
I
would have come here
that.
tonight. They would have talked about what happened in the future. That's not what.
Yes, it would help if the members of this committee didn't interrupt each other. What I need to, as I say, the argument you're putting forward is essentially a somewhat different argument as to what type of period of restriction on the employment use of the land would be appropriate. I think I need to ask Mr. Mackey or Mr. Bailey to comment. It's your application, James, isn't it? Is it? Oh, right. As to how reasonable that would be in terms of a justification. I'm not quite sure preferment to local employment would work, but there might be another ground.
Chair, Councillor Mumford is entirely sound, as he always is, in his reasoning for his concerns. It is correct that a building occupied by an employee tied to the building next door is still nevertheless a dwelling. So therefore it would not be unreasonable, or it would be reasonable, to attach a limitation within the condition that is to be amended to identify a period that you consider to be appropriate to prevent the establishment of a full-time dwelling. Whether you consider it to be 3 months or 6 months, that is for you. But it would be a further amendment to condition 6, which would say restricted to tourist accommodation for no more than 28 days and for employment purposes wholly ancillary to this business for whatever period you consider to be appropriate.
Yes, I think that works because once you decouple it from the local protectionist argument, if you see what I mean. Are you maintaining 6 months, or as you suggested, or?
Yeah, I think 6 months gives the business time to fill the vacancy. And
right. We might need to finesse that very slightly, but Mr. Bailey or Mr. Mackey, did you?
I think Mr. Bailey's made a valid point that there needs to be a break between the 6 months. Otherwise, I could sign 6 months and sign 6 months the next day. I think 6 months would be a reasonable period because that ties in with a typical short hold assured tenancy. The applicant is arguing that B&B accommodation is too expensive for an employee in this profession for a longer period, and that lettings aren't available. But if an employee were to want 6 months or more, then there ought to be rented accommodation under a short hold tenancy available. So a period up to 6 months would be reasonable. But if you'll allow us to liaise with the legal officer afterwards on the drafting to ensure that there is a sufficient break provision between the tenancies, so that it prevents permanent establishment.
Okay, so if you can amend that to allow delegated authority to negotiate those, to firm up those details, so the recommendation is amended appropriately. Anyone else? In that case, no, I shall proceed to the vote on that basis then. All those in favour of the amended recommendation? Thank you very much. That's everyone. Right. I think sorry, Mrs. Brindle. Councillor Brindle.
Can I just remind you, Mr. Chairman, that I, at the commencement of last meeting, declared that I was predetermined on this, and I will therefore not talk or vote. And would you like me to leave the chamber? Yeah. Break. Okay. Okay.
Well, it wasn't on our councillor professional development programme, but if you're sure, right, if we could recommence. Be noted, Councillor Brindle, having declared an interest, is not taking part in this discussion. It's not because she's not interested. Right. We move on to land back of Cherry Orchard, Court Lodge Farm, the street, Boxley.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application, page 182 of your papers, an amendment to planning application 1750438 for the change of use of the land for the keeping of horses and stable block, in effect to include the repositioning of the stable building, waste pile, laying of type 1 hardcore and a menage. As set out under section 73A of the Town and Country Planning Act. Turning to the application details, members, in front of you. Effectively, the red line is the application site. The green lines are the public rights of way. Again, anyone indicate if my cursor does not go onto the screen and you wish me to. So this is the public right of way. This is the application site. These are the public rights of way around the site. And the photographs will show you around the site. So in effect, what you're looking at is an application that already has planning permission. They didn't construct it in accordance with planning permission, and therefore they're submitting this application to regularise what has been constructed on site. Just quick go through some of the details. This is the application site here. And this is looking along that lane, along the southern boundary. You've got the stable building, you can just see in the background here with landscaping on the bank. This is, and I should just show, just the access to the site is up here. This is looking from that access way, which is the gate here, looking down to the stable building. You can see the manege here, and just beyond that are the buildings that had been granted permission for the change of use to equestrian, the keeping of horses, and then you've got the associated storage areas for the manure, etc., along here. So this is looking towards what you can see in the distance is the pump house, which is a grade 2 listed building. So in effect, what you're looking at here is a site that had permission for the change of use of the land, but what you've got different on the site and looking at this area is the positioning of this stable building and this manege here, which wasn't on those approved drawings. This is just looking from the public right of way, and you can see in the background the stable building here. So if I can just take you back to this building, we're kind of be moving around this area around here, and then just show you some of the views looking from the public rights of way. So this is, as I said, you've got the manege here, and you've got the stable building here, you've got the pump house just off to here with its curtilage around here. This is looking, effectively, this is the curtilage of the pump house, so the actual site is beyond effectively where these trees are over this area here, but it just shows you can't really see the site from this vantage point. And then this is looking from that public right-of-way, looking straight across, and you can just see the fencing and the stable block here, and the manege just here. So this is what was approved under the original permission. This is what has been constructed and is being sought for permission now. So slight relocation of this building here, the stable block building. You can see the manege here, in this area here, with the associated areas for the keeping of horses. And then just some views of the stable buildings themselves. So in terms of, as I previously said, the permission, material weight can be given to the previous permission for the keeping of horses and the erection of a stable block and the associated hard standing. And obviously this application is seeking to regularise that use. It is considered that the built proposals do not weaken the overall characteristics and qualities of the area of outstanding natural beauty. members will be aware of the statutory duty under Section 85 of the Public Rights of Way Act in terms of the duty to conserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, but given the previous proposals, this is not considered to conflict with those requirements. There are no objections in terms of amenity, highway safety, environmental health, or on heritage grounds in terms of the setting on the pump house, and as such, there is no conflict in terms of the officer's mind in terms of with established development plan policy, and that it, in this instance, permission should be granted as set out by those conditions within the report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Took, an objector, please.
Good evening, Chairman and committee members. I'm Christopher Took, and along with my wife, we own the Grade 2 listed pump house immediately adjacent to the application site. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present this regarding this retrospective application for the Sound School. 4 main reasons and issues regarding the application: the close proximity to pump house, the materials used on the ground of the Sound School, the prevailing wind direction, and the significant health impacts of Mrs. Took. The Sound School is batted up close as possible to our boundary, in some areas about 8 inches. The vast majority of our garden is to the front of the property. The Sand School is rendering the garden unusable during the dry months. The materials used to carpet the floor are exactly that, shredded carpet fibres without any backing, which are microplastics. We all know the toxicity of plastics in the environment. These particles are kicked up during riding and drift over our garden and property, even with the slightest of breeze. As an asthmatic, these microplastics have also restricted my freedom to use my own garden and property through fear of health. For example, I'm forced to keep the windows closed whilst the Sound School is being used. Article 8 of our human rights have definitely been violated, and the health implications we suffer are catastrophic due to this unauthorised development. The prevailing wind, unfortunately, due to the prevailing wind, it is impossible for us not to be affected by the microplastics as they drift directly from the southwest across our land. The wind in the UK is predominantly southwest, and the pump house is directly northeast of the Sound School, so there is no way we cannot be affected. And the bigger and most important one is the significant health effects on my wife, and we've tried to keep this out of it, but my wife now has 1 kidney, the other one has failed with a rare illness, and the other kidney left is working at 7%. With dialysis imminent, excuse me if I get upset, with dialysis imminent while she waits for a kidney transplant, this rare illness is really causing us a lot of problem, and it's a situation of life and death. The pump house was purchased for its location to enable a stress-free life with the recommendations from the consultants on country living, easing pain and suffering and helping that recuperation. If the consultants deem the Sand School microplastics a threat, Jackie will not be able to have the home dialysis and she'll be forced to travel 3 days a week to King's College at Denmark Hill in London just to stay alive. The situation is impacting her health, but the thought of my wife going through this just brings tears to my eyes. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, Boxley Parish Council.
Good evening. Boxley Parish Council fully supports the views of the residents you have just heard from. We reiterate their concerns regarding the significant impact a Sound School laid with carpet fibres has on their health and ability to peacefully enjoy the listed property in an area of outstanding natural beauty. The officer's report seems not to focus on the main aspect of this application, but rather addresses all the minor alterations to which we have raised no objections. In doing so, they have failed to fully address the significant harm and loss of residential amenity created by the Sound School. In relation to this, we feel there are 2 major factors to consider. Firstly, the Sound School location on the site. It's been placed hard up against the eastern boundary of the site, joining the pump house. The prevailing wind directions is from the southwest, and the pump house lies immediately northeast excuse me, of the sound school. So the majority of the kicked up dust and fibres from the school are blown directly over the property and its garden. And the pump house, as you saw from the drawings, sits to the far north of their plot. So their primary outdoor amenity space is to the front of the property, immediately next to and directly downwind of the sound school. The applicant refers to this dust in their correspondence and recognises it as an issue. They propose to water the school prior to its use. However, we fail to see how, without a dedicated sprinkler system being installed, satisfactory wetting will be at all feasible, and don't consider it sufficient to mitigate the harm caused from the dust. Our second point raises the issue of the sand school surface material. It's been laid with shredded carpet fibres rather than a natural alternative. It is well documented the harm chemicals and microplastics contained within recycled carpet fibres can do to humans and livestock in an area or close by, as well as the wider environment. The carpet backing is removed before shredding, and the fibres particles are free to be separated and kicked up during riding or dispersed on the breeze, blowing into the neighbouring property, into the atmosphere, and possibly seeping into the watercourse. We fail to see how it was acceptable to allow development that essentially drops harmful fibres and chemicals over a residential property and surrounding areas. It also should be noted that the planning inspector has previously stated that any attempt to screen an area does not mitigate the harm. Merely hiding it from view is not, and it won't make it go away. We would ask that you give full weight and consideration to the significant impact and harm this sand school has on the neighbouring property's residents and the surrounding area. In addition to the above, we would ask that the original condition that the muck be empty monthly be adhered to instead of 6 monthly removal is now being proposed. It should be noticed that Boxley falls within a nitrate vulnerable zone with specific rules for the storing of manure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. There's no urgent update as far as I'm aware, so can I take declarations of lobbying at this point? Thank you, Councillor Webb. Right. Okay, it's an interesting one. The principle of development, of course, was accepted through the grant of previous consent. However, there are a few questions I'd like to ask about how we give iteration to that in relation to this application. The applicants raised a few, the objector and Boxley Parish Council raised some issues in relation to the materials that are being used in surfacing. Now, I would have, and also the particular issues raised by the relocation. Would you have any comments on that, Mr. Bailey, before?
In terms of, as I've said previously, obviously weight needs to be given. As decision makers, you determine what weight you give. Weight needs to be given that, and the fallback position is that there is a permission for change of use of the land. If you can't hear me, you're back, let's just let me know. So in terms of that decision, that must weigh in your effectively balancing exercise when you look at this application. It seems to me the concern relates to the manege. Now, obviously, members will recall a previous scheme where we had granted at the previous committee on the 27th a shredded rubber manege. It's perfectly, you need planning permission for the manege because it's a material operation. The use is the same, but it's the material operation that you're putting on the ground. So it is perfectly within members' scope if they find that that material that they've got is harm. It can't cause landscape harm, I don't think, in this instance, because it's of a low-coloured nature and it's not glaring in terms of its surface treatment. But if you had, I would suggest if you had evidence that those carpet fibres are causing an issue to amenity, it is something that members could consider. But I do stress, that if you're going down that route and refusing it on that basis, there'd need to be some evidence base for it. So members could, if they found that surface treatment acceptable, because it's a retrospective application, be effectively saying that that is not acceptable on its basis and you require a different surface treatment to be put down, which maybe doesn't, could give an example, like a shredded rubber. Now, that could be an issue, and you could put a condition similar to condition 3, which says within a period of 2 months, details of an alternative surface treatment shall be submitted to and approved by the LPA, and that shall be placed on the site. The applicant would then have the ability to appeal, if they so wished, that condition, and effectively it would go through the process on that basis. But yes, members are entitled, if they so find that that is objectionable, then they can do that.
I think certainly that was something I was hoping that we could consider. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. I was hoping the same, actually. The sand school, I'll call it, use the English term, is something really important if you keep horses. I can't emphasise enough, because schooling horses is absolutely vital, and the sand school is a really major part of it. Generally speaking, you would have a sand school fairly close to the loose boxes or stables, because you're bringing the horses out probably on leads or possibly on long reins, and you don't always ride them in the sand school. Sometimes you school them on long reins, and I've done a huge amount of that myself. So I can understand it being close to the stabling. I do understand that. What I'm not happy about is the surface. I've done most of my schooling on traditional surfaces like sand, basically. It's called a sand school for a reason, and then you use particular type of sand. You don't use builder's sand. It's the last thing you want horses on, because it makes such a mess. But you do have to use particular type of sand. Or you can use the rubber that has been described by Mr. Bailey, which I've also used myself. What I don't like is this carpeting. I've got to admit, I really don't. And I don't think it's ideal at all. And if we can find a way to have something alternative to that in our decision, then I think that would be a very good result. If, honest opinion, I think it would meet quite a lot of the objections that I'm hearing. Personally, as a rider and as someone who's driven horses as well, I don't like this carpeting at all. I much prefer the traditional surfaces that are used in sand schools. But sand schools are important, and I do think they're part of our countryside. The horses, perhaps I'm a bit biased, but to me horses are part of our history and part of the countryside, and I love them to bits personally, so that's neither here nor there. But anyway, if we can go down that road, I would love it.
Are you proposing that as an amendment?
Yes, I would. Yes, if that was
seconded. Councillor Reeves, do you wish to speak?
No, I won't need to speak, but I just second that.
I think it's been said. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, can we have the southern view up again, please? That's southwestern. That's the one. So that's new landscaping, is it? That's going up the fence. Nod if I'm right. Or I can't see a lot of landscaping unless that's the new landscaping. The building itself on the plans is showing weatherboard. I don't see any weatherboard there. It looks like concrete block. My other point was, is there any opportunity to do any landscaping between the pump house and the sand school? And the other thing is, we're plumping for a material, and I'm not an expert. I mean, sand school gives it away in the name, but the material that we're talking about now, shouldn't there be some research in what material we're recommending? Because I don't know whether it should be rubber, sand, turf. I can only just about ride a bike, let alone a horse. So I think there's some scope there to find the best surface for the neighbour's amenity, rather than just plump for one. I'd like to consider the landscaping between the pump house and the sand school, and the building itself. Should it be weatherboard?
So I think we could have a delegation to the office to evolve the most appropriate and least impactive material. there are a number of possibilities, but certainly not the ones that's being suggested. Well, that would be all right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly. What I would ask, because it's a retrospective application and the provisions in terms of enforcement need to be made sure they're tight. So in effect, that if we don't get compliance with the condition, then kind of thinking about the permission effectively lapsing for this permission. So I'd need some delegation to sort of tie up those conditions to make it tighter, that if they're not adhered to, then effectively this permission is lost, but the applicant would still have a form of permission. So I'd just ask for delegation on that, just to deal with Councillor Mumford's point. I suppose what you're saying here is a strengthening of this landscaping boundary here, which you're perfectly entitled to do. So that's to the, that's to the eastern boundary here, around the area of the Sand School stroke Manege, whichever way you call it. So you're looking for a greater landscaping strip here. So I could seek amendment of condition 2, as set out on your papers, page 187, to seek a strengthened landscaping area around here. And obviously I would then add another condition, probably a combined condition with condition 3, which took effect of the alternative material to the Sand School, and to look at the disposal of runoff from the stable. So I'd combine those two into a more strengthened condition that would deal with enforcement matters. That's what I'd say.
Excellent. Any further points, or anyone wishing to? Councillor Kimmants, and then Councillor Clark.
Councillor Clark pointed out to me that the actual footprint of it is not a great deal different. But my issue would be with the material used. Being that I'm a great race goer, I'll go to the fibre sand track, and that is a high quality track. There's no carpet in that. So yeah, I think that what needs to be looked at is what we're using, well, what's being used, for the fibre sand, because there is fibre sand out there that, okay, it might be a lot more expensive, but, you know, if you're running a business, you don't run around in a Mini if you're running people to and fro the airport, do you? You use the appropriate vehicle. So the appropriate agent would be proper fibre sand and not chewed up carpet and sand.
Yeah, well, indeed. Councillor Clark, did you wish to say anything? Councillor Mumford, very...
Well, it's just my point on weatherboarding. I don't want to leave those concrete blocks up there.
In terms of here, this is a weatherboarded building. This is what you're talking about here. And then going to the other, let me just, if you can see here, I'm just trying to zoom in, if you can. That is a weatherboarded stable block, if that helps. I can't see the block work.
Don't worry, Councillor Mumford, it's happened to all of us at some time or another. Right, we've got an amended recommendation. Is everyone clear? Okay, those in favour? Those against? Right, could someone knock on the door and tell Councillor Brindle she can come back? Welcome back, Councillor. It's not been the same without you, I assure you. Right, we move on to land at Rankins Farm, Linton Hill, Linton.
Thank you. Thank you, members. This is an application for the erection of polytunnels with associated soft landscaping and draining works, including the provision of swales. Turning to the site context, in effect, the red line boundary is the application site, and this blue line boundary is obviously in the ownership of the applicant. And I'll come back to that later on because that is a subject of a previous planning permission for polytunnels on the site. So it's just drawing members' attention, and I'll show you what those what that consent granted. So members will have a picture that in effect were permission to be granted tonight, then the effect would be of the polytunnels running straight from here right the way down to this road. Obviously this is the A229 down here, and you've got Redwall Lane running along here to the top. Members will also remember a recent proposal for a rather large proposal at Wares Farm, which is to the west of this application site, which I'll go through in a second. So just to point some characteristics of the site, you've got the river belt running, if that's correct line, river belt, sorry. And sorry, I'm not from Maidstone. So, and then you've got the public right-of-way that runs adjacent to that watercourse, which is around here. So you have got views from that public right-of-way through to this area. Members will obviously know you've got the LLV, the Greasand Ridge, to the north of the site, but that's not part of not within the application site. I'm just pointing out in terms of highlighting issues. Yeah, I know. What you've got also in here, and I'll come back to this plan later on, is this effectively shows existing hedgerow planting that's already on site, which is proposed to be strengthened, and you've got some new hedgerow planting down here, which is proposed to be planted on site. This is the area that I've referred to as the Wares Farm complex. Unfortunately, I've only got the aerial photograph for the 5th of May 2018. That is a lot more advanced than it shows on this photograph, but it's important that members see the context in the surrounding site as well. So turning to, this is just the same kind of aerial photograph which shows it, the site in context. So the site is effectively around this area here, it includes this field, it goes along this area, drops down, comes down here, and goes along this area here, up and around. And effectively that is that. So that is, in terms of aerial photograph, that is what the proposals would encompass, and members should be aware also of that land over here in this dark green area that already has planning permission under that former permission for the polytunnels. I'll now move on. So this is looking west across the site. So imagine if you're in this position here, looking west up the site here. What I should also point out, and I did point out, there is, along here, there is an existing hedgerow which is proposed to be supplemented, and you'll see in the photographs next where the polytunnels will sit either side of that existing hedgerow. So that's looking west across the site. Along here you can see that hedgerow just beginning to emerge on the left of the photograph, and then that is that same hedgerow. So the development would take place in this field here and also on the field to the left of that hedgerow as well. This hedgerow would be strengthened with native species in order to provide breaks within those field boundaries. So this is looking northwest. It is a large site, so it's quite difficult to capture everything in the site, I would add, in these photographs. This is looking northwest to the site. These are the agricultural workers' dwellings. These are existing polytunnels on the site. So actually the site you're looking at is just off to the east outside this photograph, but it shows you this complex. And it's looking southwest across the site with the river belt in the background over here, roughly where these trees are. So effectively, and as set out in the LVIA submitted with the application, there will be views towards the site, and there will be some significant views towards the site from this location looking towards the site. But I think that has to be taken in the context of an agricultural landscape where, especially in Maidstone, soft fruit is one of our key industries. And obviously you'll be aware of Wares Farm, which was processing of soft fruits, which is not associated with this application, but it's sort of in the same vicinity. So this is looking north towards the existing farm complex. Again, as I said, the site is off to the right, but it shows you sort of the context of the site. And what you've got over here is you've got the mitigation for the Wares Farm site, and you've got the Wares Farm site off to the left over here. So this is the proposed site plan. Again, these are the swales that are being incorporated into the scheme to deal with surface water runoff. This is the red line for the adjoining site. So I'm now moving over to this site, not part of the current application you're considering, but also part of a consideration that you would get a contiguous line of polytunnels from the A229 across to the Wares Farm complex. So this is in effect the landscaping scheme approved for that site. You've got the A229 running here, and this is effectively the same section of polytunnels. They are conditioned that the polythene shall only be covered, they should be uncovered during the winter months, and it's set out in the conditions what those periods of time are. Again, I've taken you back through this plan. Again, I think I've talked to you about the strengthening of these existing boundary hedgerows with native species and new planting going in the gaps where there aren't any existing hedgerows on the site. This just looks at how the drainage plan will work. This is not part of this reservoir, is not part of the application details for this application, and is not required to facilitate the use of these polytunnels. That's the application that I've just taken you through. And again, this is the same section details for the polytunnels that are proposed. So this application seeks a further 20 hectares of polytunnels for soft fruit production with the provisions of swales to deal with surface water runoff. The landscape strategy plan seeks to strengthen existing hedgerows and plant new ones where necessary, and all planting, as I've set out, will be of native species. The report sets out the need for polytunnels, and this is set out, and I draw members' attention to paragraphs 2.4 of the report, page 304, which sets out the need for the polytunnels. And I think that matter has been well rehearsed in this room. There is a need, a growing demand for soft fruit production. There is a need to extend the growing season, and there is a need to compete with the European market, who have a much better climate than we do. So in order to make our businesses in the southeast productive, there is in effect a need to prolong the growing season. The application, as you'll see, is supported by the Council's Rural Planning Advisor, and that is also set out on your papers. The report sets out compliance of the application with principally policy DM36, because that's our primary policy with regard to agricultural buildings, and also assesses the landscape impact arising from the development. So whilst the report acknowledges some impacts on the landscape as a direct result of the development, and I would draw members' attentions to paragraph 6.26 of your report. I'm not trying to shy away from the impacts that are set out. With a combination of the proposed landscaping that is set out in the report, the support for agricultural development, which will aid the agricultural industry and the Clockhouse Farm in this locality, it is considered that such impacts fall within an acceptable limit, and on that basis the proposals set out in the report comply with policies SP17, DM30 and DM31. All other matters are considered acceptable, and planning permission is therefore recommended to be granted subject to the conditions as set out on your papers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ogden for the applicant, please.
Good evening, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Thomas Ogden, a Director of Bloomfield's Chartered Town Planners, the applicant's agent. This application seeks planning permission to provide an area of polytunnels to support the growth of soft fruit at Clockhouse Farms, mainly strawberries, raspberries and blackberries. The polytunnels are proposed to be covered from March to November. Clockhouse Farms is a father-son family-run business. Clockhouse Farm are producers of soft fruit locally, as well as providing 40% of sweet blackberries and 10% of raspberries nationally, which is of national significance. This soft fruit is now required by the supermarkets to be grown under polytunnels to ensure quality and to extend the growing season, as well as the more general improvements in terms of increased yield, but lower wastage and pesticide use. The use and importance of polytunnels in this manner is recognised by national planning practice guidance, as well as in the local plan due to the provision of homegrown produce and sustainable food delivery. The proposal site is well located for the efficient delivery of the soft fruit, as it abuts the packaging and distribution centre for Clockhouse Farms, as well as being in the vicinity of a number of other polytunnels and the main farm holding for efficient labour resource. In support of this case, the agricultural consultant recognises the need for the proposal, indeed commenting, "The tunnels comprise units of production in themselves and can be regarded as inherently required and appropriate for the purpose of modern UK soft fruit production." As part of this application, a landscape visual impact assessment has been undertaken by a suitably qualified landscape architect, following the strict guidelines of the Landscape Institute. This report concludes that there are no landscape or visual reasons why planning permission should not be granted. The proposal will provide a robust landscaping planting scheme. The drainage for the polytunnels has been designed and analysed by a suitably qualified drainage engineer, with swales proposed to control any runoff. Importantly, KCC Flood and Water Management are content with the drainage strategy proposed. The Environment Agency, KCC Highways, Minerals and Waste Departments, as well as Natural England do not object to the proposal. KCC Ecology do not object to the proposal and comment that the submitted ecological management plan will offer biodiversity benefits. We agree with your planning department's conclusion that the proposal would meet local and national planning policy. There is an agricultural need for the polytunnels, and the proposal would not cause any significant harm in terms of visual or residential amenity, highway concerns, flood risk, impact upon the surrounding landscape, and would provide net biodiversity gain. Respectfully, we hope that members are able to share this inclusion drawn by your plan department in recommending this application for approval, and therefore supporting the applicant's growth of award-winning soft fruit. Thank you for your time and in advance for your consideration of matters.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Webb.
Good evening, members. Like last week, I'm here to talk on behalf of Linton Parish Council, an application they have called to committee. And I'd like to summarise their objections to this scheme. Firstly, the Parish Council has concern over the scale of the polytunnels that would be created by this application when linked up with the existing tunnels that Mr Bailey has talked about on the neighbouring fields. Also, the complex of buildings that exist on the Wares Farm site, which was approved 2 years ago. At present, this site is open countryside and looks natural from the surrounding environs. The Parish Council feel that the erection of polytunnels here would cause harm to that rural countryside look and feel. Secondly, the Parish Council is concerned by the proposed mitigation to hide the site from public footpaths and from the main settlement area of Linton. The Greensand Way and the village both lie on the ridge to the north and have significant views over the site. There is concern that no amount of hedging would properly screen the polytunnels from these vantage points, especially with the prospect of a low sun to the south reflecting off the structures towards the ridge. And lastly, there is worry from the properties immediately to the north on Redwall Lane. Some of these were flooded due to Storm Ciara, and the runoff from these fields without polytunnels being so great as to wash over the road and onto the properties. If the ground was then to be covered in polytunnels, even more water would bypass the grounds and cause more problems for residents, unless the proposed swales are properly maintained. I hope the committee will consider these points carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. As no one else is indicating, have a go. Obviously, maintaining the swales is important, and thank you for that point. I would have thought, and I know this site quite well because there's been quite a few planning applications of one sort or another in this area, that there is actually quite a good chance that with the swales in and operating properly, that the runoff would actually be less. Having said that, there is always a balance to be struck, but let's be clear, I must disagree with the parish council. This is not a natural landscape, this is a farmed landscape. It may be open countryside, but it's scarcely natural. Like most of Kent, other than ancient woodland remnants, this is a landscape that has been created by man. In some ways it's attractive. Parts of the open fields are not particularly attractive. But the balance we have to strike is, do we want the countryside to be a museum? Do we want it to be somewhere where no one earns a living? Do we want to have an economy? And do we want to have agricultural production that survives and flourishes? If we want a living, working countryside and jobs for people, then unfortunately, or otherwise, polytunnels have to exist, because it is not possible to meet the demands of supermarkets and other organisations without so doing so. And one thing that wasn't mentioned by the applicant but could have been was that in this day of climate change issues, is it really a good idea to prevent British growers growing crops? Because that won't take away the demand for soft fruits in January. We will just need to import them with a rather higher carbon footprint from Spain or Morocco. So I personally think that on balance, the argument, unless there is a very substantial landscape harm, comes down in favour of a living, working countryside. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I drive the 229 every day, and I have to say, and I'll be blunt, the polytunnels are an eyesore. I'll be honest with you, they are. They're dreadful. In fact, when we were coming down the Green Sand Ridge, my wife actually thought the area was flooded because it looked like, from a distance, that the area was covered in water. It's really awful. I get the point that, that agricultural is a business, and I understand that, but I just think that this is just in the wrong place. I really do. I mean, when I drive along that road, and I did tonight coming in, I could see those polytunnels. They were not hidden. They looked absolutely ghastly. Now, I know you're going to say, yeah, but they're needed because of the agricultural production, but sometimes I wonder where we are going for too higher yields, and we're forgetting about the quality. I can remember as a child, and this does take me back and terribly date me, I realise strawberries have always been grown in Kent, and we've had some lovely Kentish varieties of strawberries, which I don't actually see anymore in the supermarkets. They all seem to have quasi-Spanish names, even when they're grown in Scotland. So I don't, I do miss that. And I do, as many of you know, I do work a lot on the continent, and one of the things my continental friends bust a gut for is going for very high quality French strawberries, which are grown naturally, none of this polytunnel business, and they pay premium prices for them. And sometimes I wonder, when we're going for this mass production, whether we're right in doing that always. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm not always convinced about it. And I just feel this is absolutely, it's just awful. Every time I come into Maidstone, I look at them and think, God, it's a dreadful sight. This doesn't help at all. I'm sorry, this is the one item tonight that really depressed me when I read it, because I'm not sure what the answer really is, but I just struggle with this. I really do, because it's so awful. I'm sorry to be blunt, but...
by all means be blunt. We're never going to agree on this one. Councillor Mumford.
No one has any problem with any industry modernising. In the 70s, we turned our landscape yellow with the oilseed rape. No one kicked off about that. You can't sell strawberries to Tesco's, etc., unless you put them under tunnels and the strict rules that they have. People were asking for them from May to October. The supermarkets will get them from somewhere, and you've said you'd be carbon neutral by 2030, and this set of polytunnels are right next to where they will be packed. It's our factory floor. I don't know how many times I've got to say that, and it needs to modernise, and we need to accept it will change, and it won't always look pretty, but it's an industry, and an industry that's moving forward to the 21st century. I'd like to now propose that we approve this application with conditions as recommended.
Councillor, it's your turn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd have to completely agree with Councillor Munford on that. In my day job, I work in research and development. So I work with farms, horticultural, agricultural, arable, mixed farming. We've got to the point that farms now have satellites to deal with precision farming, so that actually their yields are increased and their time is used more efficiently. I'm one of these people that actually thinks things like wind farms look attractive, so I have no aesthetical issues over polytunnels. But if we're going to be moving forward, we can't expect this industry to stay as it was 200 years ago just for aesthetic reasons, when every other industry has taken advantage of improvements and research and development, it is a government policy. There is a government pot there for industries to take advantage of to develop new ways of improving their sector and their industry. If we're turning around to a farm and saying you can't do that, we are literally going against national government policy. So I completely agree that we should approve this.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I definitely agree with the last 2 points. I feel it's not that I don't understand the concerns about the visual appearance, but personally, when I see them, I just feel that there's a thriving industry in the countryside. That's my sort of overriding feeling about it. And in the same way that listed buildings or listed mills and various sort of structures that come forward for redevelopment because the old use isn't working anymore, if we can't find a modern use, we end up knocking it down and building houses with various buildings around the town over the years and in the borough. And I feel the same about the countryside. In a way, this is probably the best use for this landscape. There will always be somebody, if that doesn't stay viable as economically, there will always be somebody that will say, let's put it to a different use, and it could be a lot worse. So I do think that we should be looking to all of our sort of landscapes. We have to look at how they fit in with today's world, and this isn't a natural landscape with an ancient woodland. It's a piece of farmland, and we just need to work out how that fits in with today's society.
I think Councillor Munford and Eve made my point somewhat eloquently anyway. I will only add that much though I hate polytunnels, I do agree they're ugly, by the way. They do spoil the view and they spoil the landscape, but it is a living landscape. We must remember that we need our farmers to be able to farm, and they need to be able to do so efficiently and profitably. We should not stand in their way unnecessarily.
Thank you. And finally, I think Councillor Kimhans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Perry hit the nail on the head when he said about, from a distance, it looks like water, like a big lake, because it does. And to me, that's not ugly, you know. As you get nearer, you think, oh, it's a polytunnel. Something that we seem to forget, and I am a connoisseur of food, as you can see. But I guarantee you, strawberries that are grown even in polytunnels in this country taste 10 times better than the Spanish stuff that you get sent over. Because by the time it gets here, it's inedible, it's horrible, it does not taste like a Kentish strawberry. So, and also raspberries are grown in there as well, and blackberries, you know. Yeah, I must admit, I'm getting hungry now because I'm thinking about these polytunnels growing all this fruit, and it's just, to me, I mean, I'm sorry, but yeah, I'm all for it.
In the long history of planning arguments in Maidstone, that is one of the most impressive and eloquent arguments that I have heard for some time. No, seriously, it is an important point. Anyone else wish to add anything? In that case, it's been proposed and seconded, the recommendation on the papers, unamended. Those in favour? Those against? No abstentions because everyone's voted. Well, yeah. No. It would have been too much, Councillor Perry, to go through an entire evening unanimously, although we got close to it. So thank you for that. We move on to Wind Charms, Chartway Street, Sutton Valence.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an approval of reserved matters for the erection of 9 detached dwellings. Remember, this application considers layout, scale, landscaping and appearance. Access has already been approved as part of the outline approval, which was approved on appeal under planning reference 15507-493. That is attached as an appendix to your papers. Also, officers consider that because of the details that have submitted with this application, that members are also able to approve condition 3 of that appeal decision, because obviously the outline conditions are still required to be submitted, but given the level of detail, officers consider that you could approve that were you minded to approve this scheme as well. So what members have got to remember that the principle for 9 dwellings has already been established. Members are only considering the details pursuant to that in terms of the scale, design, appearance and layout on the site. So turning to the application, so this is the application site. You've got Chartway Street to the north and you've got the A274 North Street coming down here. Just a couple of things to point out to members. You've got the dwelling that's served here through this access track. Sorry, nothing.
Cursor's gone again.
Sorry, cursor gone again. So just to, again...
we need to make a capital budget application for next year for a new mouse, James. Sorry.
Careful, I wouldn't go too far on that. In terms of, so just again, what you've got is you've got Chartway Street along to the north, and you've got the A274 North Street down here. This was the dwelling house that is served by the existing access track coming down here. So that would effectively be closed up, and the new access, which has been approved already, would come centrally through the site. A couple of things to point out. The inspector drew particular attention to this screening belt around the site, which almost made the site more inward looking in terms of the appearance. And whilst we're under a tilted balance in the day of the appeal, obviously that had an influence on the decision notice going forward, but members aren't considering that because the principle's gone forward. You also, the inspector did point out there's a public right-of-way that runs just off photograph here that comes down here, and also commented in terms of how the application would be read from the public footpath. Hence, you'll note some of the conditions we've sought to strengthen in terms of boundary hedging, which you'll see later on down this boundary to grow up to a minimum height of 2 metres, to be retained at that height, so you can actually preserve the view from the public right-of-way from that public footpath. You'll also note within the report that whilst the inspector did, at condition 4, I think it is, seek to address in terms of this landscaping belt, your officers consider that we should strengthen that, because from experience what tends to happen is that belt gets included within the ownership of individual houses, and then what happens is those individual houses have a tendency to eke into that woodland. I'm not saying that would happen, but I think it's in our interests, or your interests as a committee, to seek further protection on that point. Hence you'll see our recommended condition on that point, that we have details of the actual curtilages of those dwellings, and that the fact that this belt should be secured outside of those individual ownerships with a separate management company which should retain its longevity in the longer term and protect its screening. So you probably want to know what the application's about now. If I turn to that, possibly. In terms of you've got 9 dwellings arranged around a sort of a central spine, which is not a dead straight spine road, so it creates an interest in terms of the street scene. You've got the houses numbered 1 to 9 as you go around the site. I've got some house design types so you can see. And there is also a requirement to provide access to the existing wind chimes. So as you would have noted, that access previously ran here, and as part of the outline that was going to be closed up and this new access point inserted. So that's a logical route to provide access to the existing dwelling and wind chimes. Houses, they are, as I said, by retaining this buffer, what I would call a strategic buffer, if I could, in this context. Houses are going to be inward looking, so they front out, face onto the road, and they've got these garden areas, and if you're going to retain this buffer, there's not another real way that you can actually design the layout of the site if you want to retain that buffer planting. So this is just, again, some views from Chartway Street. This is the corner of Chartway Street and the A274 looking into the site, and you will see the importance of retaining that buffer planting around the boundaries. And again, from the A274. Chartway Street, the site is on the left of the site here. And this is, again, looking towards the site from Chartway Street. So in terms of this, just gives a sort of a flavour in terms of a street scene of what is proposed, and in terms of the materials, the external materials which are proposed, you've got wooden cladding, PV roof tiles that you can see in terms of set out in terms of the detailing on here. In terms of brickwork, you've got facing brickwork, and you've got white render in terms of the various elevations. So as the report sets out, not necessarily a traditionalist Kentish vernacular, but given the characteristics of the site and the inward-facing nature and the protection of the screening around the site, I think that allows a degree of scope for subsequent changes within the site, and as long as there is a coherent feel around those individual units which this scheme does achieve, then that would be acceptable in terms of the overall appearance of the site. In terms of a bit more detail, this is plot 1 of the site. So again, in terms of just looking at where plot 1 is, you've got plot 1, and I'm going to refer to plot 5 as well here. So you can see the front of the site and towards the rear of the site. So this is the elevations in terms of plot 1 to give a street perspective in terms of here. So you've got more traditional facing brickwork, you've got a more contemporary element with white render, and you've got the wooden sort of cladding to add that contemporary feel to the unit. Unit 5, in terms of similar cohesive design patterns, similar use of materials, slightly different house design type, but you've got a varying type of house typologies, as I'd call them, around the site. So you create a nice bit of interest around the site, but the link and the cohesiveness is provided by the material palette that you get from this scheme. In terms of, you've got the existing wind chimes, the centre of the site, you've got sort of an anometric view, if that's correct in terms of what I've called it. I think that's what it is. So it shows in terms of the context of the site, the importance of this boundary treatment of the site, and this does really show that it is kind of an inward-looking site in terms of which has
less relationship to some of the other properties which sort of front onto the streets. And then sort of lastly, you've got a landscape strategy plan in terms of coming forward. As I said, officers have sought to strengthen up that boundary, planting to take that away from technically ownership of the individual applicants. Obviously that detail needs to come forward for submission, but I personally consider that's a vitally important matter. You can see in terms of where the location of the various bat tubes, etc., which are set out in terms of this area. This gives a perfect opportunity to sort of, retain these enhanced biodiversity features within that woodland without them being part and parcel of someone's back garden. So again, I think that adds to the biodiversity feature of the site. Local native species proposed. Again, you can see this area along this eastern boundary, and again, you'll note the condition in the officer's report which sets out that our view is that that should be allowed to grow up to 2 metres in height to provide some screening in terms of the houses. You'll obviously see above them, but from the view from the public footpath, it's trying to mitigate as much as possible that impact arising from the development. So overall, in terms of, I'm not going to go through my rather long spiel on the application. I hopefully have set out the details. If members can just consider the principle of development is established, the access is established, we've sought to strengthen the screening around the site. The house design types in terms of 2-storey dwellings are considered acceptable in terms of scale. The appearance in terms of the collective cohesive mix in materials bind the scheme together. And in terms of the landscaping, a good deal of the landscaping is by protecting that existing strategic buffer and supplementing that eastern boundary. So overall, I think this is a good scheme coming forward. Yes, it had its origins in different days in terms of the outline, again, which members aren't considering, but I think this will come up with a good scheme coming forward which meets the terms of the local plan policy, and therefore the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm glad that was a short presentation. Councillor Poulter, Sutton Valence Parish Council.
Could you show this up, please, for reference? Yes. Okay, there it is. The reason the Parish Council has brought this application to the committee is because of the landscaping and woodland planting surrounding the development site. We have asked several times, and to date, we have still not received answers or confirmation to the following. Who currently owns the buffer planting? During the recent bad weather, a tree fell over onto the pavement and was left to neighbours to clear away the debris. The Parish Council need to know who will own the woodland planting after the houses have been built and subsequently sold. The woodland border is outside the boundaries of the houses. The Parish Council also need confirmation that the planting, currently 10 metres deep on the North Street and 13 metres deep along Chartway Street, will be retained in perpetuity. This is an essential part of the parish. It separates the settlement and rural areas of the parish. We believe that removal of such planting would have an adverse effect on the street scene and character of the area, contravening DM30 of the local plan and the MPPF 127 and 170. We also need confirmation that there will be a management plan in place for the care and preservation of the woodland border. This has been recommended in item 611 of the planning report. The Parish Council would also like confirmation that the drop curb at the current entrance will be removed, the entrance closed and replanted. The legend on the site plan up there shows a public verge, and the Parish Council want to know where that public verge is. The hedge on the eastern boundary needs to be introduced. This would ensure the impact of the development viewed from the outside, and particularly from the public right-of-way, will be limited. It is not clear from the planning document whether the developers are extending the pathway from Chartway Street around the corner to North Street. The Parish Council would like to see the pathway extended as sustainable travel is encouraged to enable pedestrian links to the school and shops. This would benefit all the residents, as most parents drive about 500 metres to the school because of the dangers of the crossroads. The Parish Council asks that the Planning Committee refuse this application pending the outcome of the above. Thank you very much.
Right, Mr. Court for the applicant, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've heard, this is a reserve matters application on a site that already has outline permission for residential development. Now, prior to submitting this application, we worked extensively with your planning officers on the details of the scheme. We submitted plans, discussed them, amended them, resubmitted all the revised proposals, discussed them again. It was quite an extensive but well worthwhile process through which we went. I'm pleased to say now that we've produced a scheme that has the support of your planning officers who are now able to recommend it for permission. As you've heard, Chairman, the Parish Council have expressed certain concerns and request for confirmation. I must say that they are concerns rather than, I believe, fundamental objections. In particular, the points regarding the landscaping, planting and maintenance of the hedge line can be, and indeed are, addressed by conditions. The Parish Council has also commented on the drop curb and the extension of the public verge and fence line, but they do not, in my opinion, justify or warrant grounds of refusal. Indeed, we did make a presentation to the Parish Council, and again, I think that was a very useful process that we went through. Overall, councillors, I think this proposal accords with your policy, and I hope now that you'll be able to recommend approval. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Court. There isn't an urgent update. Can I take the declarations of lobbying at this point? Anyone been lobbied? Karen Chapel-Tay, myself, Councillor Atkinson. Is that all? Okay. All right. Councillor Eaves, were you indicating? Right. I'll take Councillor Mumford because Mr. Bailey is busy looking for.
I'm just looking at this and wondering if Councillor Harwood was here, what he would be thinking. Okay, they're established wood lines, and I like that. I like a eastern boundary and a few back tubes, but please explain to me what the gain is, because I can't see a massive biodiversity gain in this, which is required. I don't see any talk of renewables, and we have committed ourselves to be carbon neutral by 2030. The normal environmental conditions that we look for, hedgehog-friendly fences and all of those, I can't find them in the... It might be there. I'm having problems with my glasses lately, but... No, I'm not enthralled about no renewables, and I can't see the massive biodiversity gain that we're looking for and that's required of a new application.
It might be my hearing rather than your glasses, but I thought that Mr. Bailey did refer to PV, but I could be wrong. We'll check on that. And if you could come back on the issues raised by both Councillor Mumford and the Parish Council.
Yeah, I can. To deal with the renewables, that's on the slide in terms of, I did refer to the fact that there are PV tiles included into the proposal as shown on these proposals here. I'll go back to what the Parish Council have raised. Just draw members' attention to the buffer planting. The issue was raised in terms of concern, I think, generalising in terms of that buffer planting is retained. So if I refer members to, firstly, the inspector's report, page 283 of your papers, the inspector imposed a condition in terms of that wooden western boundary. That is the condition that we as officers thought it didn't capture what we needed it to capture, and therefore you'll see on your reports condition 5 is suggested, page 273, which seems to strengthen that in terms of ownership details of that buffer planting. To capture, in terms of the application as submitted, shows that the applicant owns the red line boundary. They didn't serve notice, they served certificate A, so therefore that effectively red line boundary is the one that you've seen in this presentation, which is, that is the red line boundary there. So the applicant is in control of that woodland, hence that condition on condition 5 is a condition that we suggest is essential to have. With regard to the ownership of that, obviously, again, the wording of that condition sets out that we need the details of who's going to be owning that to come forward to us. But it clearly says it shouldn't be in the ownership of each individual plot. So I would expect some kind of management plan to come forward that's controlled, obviously, by the residents, but eventually, obviously, it's out of separate ownership of those. That should keep the integrity of that buffer planting intact. With regard to other issues in terms of drop curbs, etc., for works outside of the site, draw members' attention again to page 284 of your papers. Condition 11 on the outline consent, because obviously members will be aware the outline consent is the planning permission. What you're considering today is just the details pursuant to that outline permission. And condition 11 of that outline consent requires details to be submitted for the section 27A agreement, which deals with closure of the existing access, localised road widening, establishing visibility space and construction of new access footways and curb details, including a step-free raised border at the bus stop where suitable. So in terms of that, hopefully deals with the issues raised in the drop curb. The issue on the eastern boundary, refer you back to the officer's report, which sets out on condition 6, page 273 of your papers, the proposed mixed native hedgerow to the eastern boundary shall be allowed to grow to a height of 2.5 metres, and then shall thereafter be maintained at a height of no less than this height. And that is effectively in the interest of preserving the views, as I said, from that public right-of-way which were identified to the east of the site that were picked up by the Planning Inspectorate. I think lastly, turning to Councillor Mumford's issue in terms of the net gain, there is no requirement in policy in terms of a net gain requirement. Obviously, officers, where in terms of biodiversity enhancements, there is that requirement in policy, and what we seek to do in this application, as set out by this landscaping plan, is to incorporate those biodiversity enhancements within this woodland area. And that, you can't really see the detail here, unfortunately. And I'm on the wrong plan, sorry, let me just go to the landscape plan. And that's what this plan does seek to incorporate in terms of, see where these areas are, that's in terms of incorporating biodiversity enhancements. You've also got a new hedgerow coming down the eastern boundary, which you'll know is not there at the current site, and obviously you'll have a sort of a management as required by the condition to come forward for this buffer planting. So I would turn around in terms of saying what you have got is you could turn around and say there is a gain in biodiversity enhancements arising from this scheme.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we have almost de facto covered parish council's concerns in terms of what we can
I'm sorry,
do.
Councillor Clark, you often do
Sorry.
this. Could you please speak nearer the
Sure.
microphone?
I think I've probably gone as far as we can go in terms of planning policy to meet the sort of concerns raised by the parish council. I definitely do agree with this notion of getting the boundaries on the inside of, getting the boundary treatments of the plots on the inside of the buffer hedges, because we have had a number of issues with those over the years. But I think most of the points I was going to raise, I think you've covered it in the answer to the last speaker.
Okay, Councillor Eves, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think most things have been covered, to be perfectly honest, by everyone else. I would just add that as much as I like the layout, and I think the boundary is a great idea in keeping that. And although the previous thing that we debated, I was on about, development and bringing everything up to 21st century, I'm going to sort of go against that and say I'd quite like to have a bit more of a traditional appearance of properties rather than the white rendering, which, give it one winter, will turn to grey and black and brown and God knows what other colour unless they're cleaned quite regularly. It's a personal opinion. I don't know what others think and whether we can actually change that appearance.
It'd probably be grey render, but give it a little time. Councillor Chapeltay.
I wish to make a small procedural point, actually, which has nothing to do with the content of the application. You asked at the beginning whether or not we had been lobbied, and I noticed not everyone put their hands up. It surprises me sometimes that not everyone is lobbied. I have just checked my email to confirm that I had indeed been lobbied. I was, and so was everyone else on this committee yesterday via email. So before we take a vote, perhaps you might wish to ask people again if they have been lobbied on this.
Right, members, do you remember or not whether you were lobbied? I know I was.
I didn't read the email.
Okay, fine. I think... Okay, but if people haven't picked it up, they haven't picked it up. We get a lot of emails. We do get a lot of emails. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sort of picking up on what Councillor Eves was saying, I'm concerned about design. I mean, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we went on a tour of various sites around Maidstone, and some quite trivial things actually become quite important. I mean, I couldn't really tell by looking at the pictures there, but it looked like some of the porch covers may be horizontal, and we saw that on some of these houses, the rain bounced off the horizontal porch, left horrible black stains, presumably of mould, above the porches. So, are we taking that sort of thing into account? And also, I can't see anything in here about electric vehicle charging points, so I think those should be included. And the planning inspector made this report in 2016, and item 3, or condition 3, mentions biodiversity, but since then we have moved on very slightly, and we're now incorporating bee bricks, possibly thanks to me, so I'd like to see that they're incorporated as well. And I can't see, well, I mean, I assume that it is possible, and I can't see any mention of solar panels either. Is it possible to incorporate those as well? So those are my questions. Thank you.
The PV was picked up. They're not solar panels as such, they're the more modern. Yeah, it's covered by condition 15. The difficulty is that we're going backward and forward between the outline consent and the reserved matters consent. So some of the things, like Swift bricks, for example, which I would have mentioned, are covered by the outline consent. Then we're now talking about the reserved matters consent. So it can get very confusing. But it is there when you actually look at it. On the design issue, I take your point, but on further investigation, I don't think that was the actual cause of the difficulty that we saw. It was more down to sloppy installation. Councillor Clark.
I just would like to notify that I have been lobbied now because I've just checked the plan that was sent to me.
Thank you very much indeed. On a more general point, I would point out that, not on this particular one, but for the general public, that quite often people do lobby members of the committee but forget to lobby substitute members, so it is worth mentioning that to everyone.
And I should say I was a sub, so I have actually taken over from someone on the committee.
Okay, so it is worth lobbying everyone. Councillor Bryn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note in the inspector's report that under condition 4, to do with the management plan, can I ask that we know the length of time? I know it says in permanent, should be permanently thereafter, which is the last two words in that condition. Can we just ensure that that is a there is a no end to the timescale on there? And secondly, if we look again at the planting, can we include in the management plan the eastern side where they're having the new hedging?
Yeah, we're just checking that. I think it largely covers it, but if there's any loopholes that will be tightened up.
And also the eastern edge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, Councillor Kimmans.
I'm trying to make up for Tony not being here, so a bug hotel, you know. Most of the points that I wanted to make have already been discussed, and one of the points was brought forward by Councillor Atkinson about the charge points. Now, the position of this is way out of town, so I would say most of these properties are going to have vehicles. It's not going to be long before we don't have the combustion engine anymore. We're going to have electric vehicles, and not by choice, because I still prefer a combustion engine, but you know that's neither here nor there. So really every single property should have a charge point.
I agree. In this day and age, if it's not there, can we have delegated authority to put in an appropriate condition? If it's not there, because we need to check between two of the two consents. And I don't think anyone else is indicating to speak, so we will shortly try and tie it up. What we're trying to do is it's the recommendation on the papers, subject to clarifying the language around the long-term management and maintenance of the, shall we say, for want of a better word, amenity woodland buffer, and in terms of electric charging points, to clarify that. Do you need a delegated authority for anything else?
No, I'll take the delegated authority. You could put at the end of conditions 5 and 6 at all times. I don't necessarily think, because it does say maintained as such, so there is a clear point. But if you wish, you can add at all times to the conditions 5 and 6. And yes, with regard to the renewables, that is covered by condition 15, so that would need to be discharged in any event. And it does show the indication on these plans that they are putting solar PV, they're putting solar tiles on that roof form. And in terms of the last bit with regard to the electric charging point, members could, yes, I would suggest a condition to be put on that point. And I presume you're looking at that for each dwelling.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. So, James.
The main reason for that is obviously the position of how far out of town it is. So people are going to rely on using their cars more than the public transport, because the public transport out that way is not brilliant. It is there, but it turns up when it feels like it. I know, yeah. But and it's not going to be long. I mean, it's only, I think it's 16 years, and we'll be using electric vehicles. So.
Given the ones you need.
Okay, I think with those amendments, is everyone clear? Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah, we got the
bricks.
Sorry, we got Swift bricks, but I think there was a question about whether we could include a couple of B bricks.
Yeah, if I could just have delegated authority just to tighten up the conditions to make sure we include that, and I'll include that in...
Okay, those in favour of the amended recommendation, subject to the delegations on the tightening the relevant conditions? That's unanimous. Thank you for the Parish Council for being constructive and suggesting some improvements to the scheme. It's always helpful. I think that as we dealt with the appeal decisions at the last half of the meeting, that concludes the activities for this evening. Other than, no, I hadn't finished, other than one application in my own ward, which I do not wish to speak on. Does anyone else wish to speak on it? So, it's a non-material amendment.
Sorry,
I mean, it really is minor.
As a council application, I think it has to be.
Unfortunately, it's been drawn to my attention. It's a council application, so we'll have to introduce it. That's annoying, isn't it? Because it's such a small amendment. There we go.
Apologies, Chair. This is a very minor application, a non-material minor amendment to a building which the council has had an interest in and therefore benefits from the planning, so it has to come before you. It is no more than the insertion of a door to allow egress from the basement to the upper floor. If my glamorous assistant could press the button, you can see there it's a very standard door at the bottom of an escape stair. I suggest that we recommend approval and try and amend the Constitution.
Thank you.
What, both at the same time? Judging by the controversy that some of the other very easy things that I thought were easy anyway has caused at Democracy and General Purposes Committee, I never want to change the Constitution again. But I would move this deeply controversial door for approval. Have a second, Councillor Clark. Do you wish to speak on the door? No, in that case, thank you for the cogent report and introduction. Those in favour of the recommendation? On this? No. No one was lobbied on this. I know no one was lobbied on this. Even I wasn't lobbied on it. And that concludes the meeting. Do eat your yellow papers rather than leaving them here, or burn them, or whatever you do with them, but don't leave them lying around.
Excuse me, members, could we collect the yellow pages up, please?